This is David Acton, Curator of Photographs at the Snipe Museum of Art of the University of Notre Dame. Here are some observations and ideas on photographs from our exhibition, Touchstones of the 20th Century. I'd like to consider and compare the work of two contemporary photographers who use their technology and their own personal vision to create distinctive perceptions of space and time. Ebilardo Morel was born in Cuba in 1948, and he immigrated with his family to New York City in 1962. He began photographing as a teenager and took his camera along when he attended Bowdoin College in Maine. After graduation, he went on to the Yale School of Fine Arts, and at that time, while studying photography, he was influenced by the work of Robert Frank and Dion Arbus. In 1983, the artist completed his MFA degree and began teaching at Mass Art in Boston. He became a father, and while caring for his son Brady, he shifted to the use of a 4x5 view camera instead of a miniature SLR, and began to look at familiar objects around the house as he imagined his young son saw them. Using a view camera slowed down the process and gave the artist time to carefully consider each composition. Here are two images from that period, one of a toy seen from ground level and another of the top of a playground slide. These images evoke visual memories in many viewers. While teaching, Morel undertook many independent projects, creating series of photographs from carefully considered close-up perspective. One of these was the series conceived as illustrations to an edition of Alice in Wonderland, executed in 1996. For these photographs, Morel set up still lifes of books punctuated with cutouts derived from John Tenniel's famous illustrations for the first edition of Alice in Wonderland. In 1993, Morel was artist in residence at the Boston Public Library, and at that time he made many evocative studies of books as objects in close-ups that monumentalize their pages and covers. During this period, Boston Public Library had a leak in its lower floors, and a great many books were seriously damaged, and Morel took these objects as they dried and photographed them in images that suggest the deterioration of the facts and ideas presented in literature into abstraction in photographs such as this one on the left. But the artist has become best known for his Camera Obscura images, which he began to consider in about 1990 and 91, when the artist took his students back to basics, teaching them the optical characteristics of photographic technique. And many students were most enlightened by a clear understanding of the way the camera worked and the history of the Camera Obscura. Here I'm showing you a Renaissance woodcut from a thesis from 1544 describing function of the Camera Obscura. You see on the left a Renaissance-like building open on the side to show that when a room or a camera is darkened and sealed from light, a pierced hole in one wall which allows light through creates a projection on the opposite wall of the image of the lighted exterior. In this case, the sun shining through the hole creates an image of itself upside down on the opposite wall. Further to illustrate this phenomenon, Morel created his own Camera Obscura from a cardboard box, placing a lens in one side, and he made this photograph light bulb in 1991 when he opened one side of the cube to photograph the way that the lighted bulb on the right side of the image is projected inside the box or Camera Obscura, reversed. This mysterious image was fascinating to young students who had always taken the camera for granted. Next, Morel had the idea of placing his students inside the Camera Obscura itself, and he started a series series of experiments, including this photograph taken in 1991 showing the interior of Morel's bedroom in Quincy, Massachusetts, where he had blocked out all the windows with black plastic and then made a hole in the plastic which allowed the image of the neighborhood outside to project itself upside down across the walls and ceiling of his bedroom. Morel took this idea to school and covered the windows of the classroom with black plastic as well, and allowed the students to sit in class while he opened the image and cast a reflection of the street outside across the classroom walls and ceiling, making it possible for students to understand in a moment the concept underlying the function of the camera. Morel went on to take his idea of a traveling camera obscura around the world, making photographs of famous sites, often from the interior of hotel rooms or domestic interiors that look out on monuments such as Tower Bridge in London, or a humble hotel room with a great view of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, or a view of the skyline of New York City with the Chrysler Building, or the Piazza San Marco in Venice. Here you notice that the landscape is right side up, something accomplished with a mirror inside the lens, which had been used by photographers since about 1840. This is Morel's photograph in our exhibition, which represents a bedroom overlooking the Umbrian countryside in Italy, with this sort of amazing glowing horizon just above the contours of the bed. The artist also used color film in some of these photographs, and in fact explored the way that color changes in its projection into the camera obscura. Here are two images of the facade of Rouen Cathedral, taken from two different times of day in the same interior, that give a different sense of the dimension of the carved facade and a very different mood as the bright sunshine of early morning is contrasted with the long shadows and warmth of dusk. These photographs, of course, were inspired by Claude Monet's paintings of Rouen Cathedral, an extended series that the artist painted during the 1890s, representing the very same facade at different times of day, in different seasons, different weather. Next, Morel created a portable camera obscura that could be taken out into the wilderness to capture two different glimpses of the same landscape. Here on the right, you see one of these photographs from the American Southwest, on which the ground inside the tent creates a background or support for the projection of the camera obscura image of the rocks that loom above and the open sky beyond. Morel took his portable camera obscura around the world and made several fascinating series of photographs that were inspired by the work of earlier artists. One of the most exciting of these is a series representing Claude Monet's gardens at Giverny, France. Here's one of those photographs taken inside the portable camera obscura, where the garden foliage is projected down onto a gravel path, a path strewn with a few blossoms from the flowering bushes around. And the graininess of the gravel reminds one of the painterly touch of Impressionist artists. Morel took his portable camera obscura to the English Midlands to create a series inspired by the landscape paintings of John Constable. This is one of those which projects a lush landscape with buildings in the middle distance on the right, all beneath a sky full of fleecy clouds, projected on a gravelly surface. In this rather pixelated detail from the Constable photograph, you can see the gravel and rocks that provide the background for this image. Morel's interest in collapsing space, in using the camera to think about and express the physical space in which we live, is quite different from, and yet parallel in some ways, to the work of Hiroshi Sugimoto. Sugimoto was born in Japan in 1948, and in Tokyo he began photographing as a boy. He attended Rikkyo University and completed a degree that would have allowed him to begin a career in business. Instead, after graduation, he took a backpack and his camera and tramped across Europe, Russia, and the United States, making photographs. He settled in Los Angeles, where he attended the LA Art Center College of Design and worked his way through art school as an art dealer, specializing in Zen Buddhist art, which he studied at that time and became a great expert. In 1974, Sugimoto completed his BFA degree and moved to New York City to pursue the career of an art photographer. It was in 1976 that he made the photographs which first brought him to wide attention. Perhaps the first of these is this image of a polar bear and its prey, a seal on an ice floe. This image was taken in New York at the American Museum of Natural History. And in fact, it's the image of a diorama in this museum, one of these exhibits that combine taxidermy, model making, and painting in a way that is meant to bring natural history to city dwellers. Sugimoto was fascinated by these displays for many reasons, and he found that when he stood before them and viewed the exhibit through one eye, it seemed somehow less artificial than when he was able to see the entire three-dimensional display. And he thought that by using the camera, he could capture this peculiar dichotomy of the fictional and the real, because Sugimoto saw this as a capturing of a peculiar moment in time, but a moment that never really existed. It was a creation of model makers, of artisans from a certain moment in American history that represented the culture and the creator, as well as an event frozen in time, never to move forward or change, in a way similar to a photograph, which freezes the activity of its subjects. All of these ideas were bound up in Sugimoto's images, which are eerily real and yet fake at the same moment. Here's the artist on the right setting up his equipment in the American Museum of Natural History in New York, and on the left, his image of cheetahs on the savannah, another of these photographs that seems peculiarly artificial and yet somehow intriguing. In 1978, the artist started another extended series of photographs called Theaters. He had been thinking about how to capture in one photograph the passage of time and thousands of overlaid photographs in film. Sugimoto took his 8x10 view camera and went to selected American movie theaters from the 1920s and 30s, the era of great interior decoration of these movie palaces that were the center of American culture at that time. He rented the whole theater and, with his camera just below the projection booth, opened the shutter and asked the projectionist to run the entire movie that was then playing. What happened was that all of the images projected on the screen superimposed, allowing light which was not blocked from various different cells to create an enormous glow on the screen, which projected out into the theater, illuminating the interior. In this way, Sugimoto photographed an entire movie on one plate. The artist took his camera around the United States and later to Europe, making photographs of movies running in a great variety of theaters. And each of them gives a sense of time passing, of the cultural style and ideas represented in the interior of each different theater, and ultimately of the passage of time and the brevity of human experience. Here is the photograph in our exhibition, an image of the UA Walker Theater in New York City, taken in 1978. A similar idea impelled Sugimoto to begin a series representing seascapes taken from the edge of a beach or a pier off into the horizon, in a variety of different exposures, some very long, some quite short. In this way, he captured the strong horizon of the sea and the glowing depth of the sky above. Ultimately, these photographs were inspired by Sugimoto's childhood experience in Japan of taking the train along the coast and looking out to sea, and as the horizon moved by at great speed, it seemed to change and yet never to change. And this dichotomy was what the artist tried to capture in his Seascape series. He traveled around the world to different oceans and different coastlines to make comparative sea images contrasting the sea and the sky. Some of them represent a rising or setting sun reflected off calm sea and moving clouds above, while others, taken on a foggy, overcast day, show a soft and impenetrable sky and a dark and steely sea. In 1995, Sugimoto was working in Kyoto, where he made photographs at the Sanju Sangendo, a temple which houses a famous sculpture by Tanken from the Kamakura period of the 1,000-armed cannon. Later, to honor this famous sculpture, artisans created 1,000 lifetime replicas which were placed side by side inside the temple, sculptures each made of cypress wood and gilt, sitting side by side as if in a grid. And these are bodily representations of the repetition of a mantra or a sutra that Buddhists would repeat in their ceremonies. Sugimoto made 48 photographs of these 1,000 Buddhas from different points of view and under subtly different conditions of illumination in order to try to create a visual sense of the repetition and the meditative quality of these images. And when all of these photographs were installed together, as in this installation at Pace Gallery in New York, one gets a true sense of the artist's perception of time and change and repetition, which forces the contemplation of human place in this vast universe. Sugimoto, who is also a great designer and architect and head of an architectural firm in Kyoto, made many varied series of photographs expressing similar ideas and similar perception of moments in time and the projection of time into infinity. One of my favorites is the series Lightning Fields, made in 2000. These are large-scale photographs, 9 feet tall and 7 feet wide, and here I'm showing 2 of them. They were not made in a camera, but created when Sugimoto took huge sheets of sensitized film and spread them across a metal table. Then he created an electric flash across the metal surface using a 400,000 volt Van de Graaff generator to apply an electrical charge onto the metal tabletop, which in effect caused bolts of lightning to shoot through the film itself, capturing these remarkable images that look for all the world like an aerial view of a river system running across a landscape. Whereas many of Sugimoto's photographs were meant to express the passage of time into infinity. These images suggest microseconds and the movement of electricity at speeds not visible to the human eye. I'm David Acton, curator of photographs at the Snipe Museum of Art at the University of Notre Dame. Thanks for listening, and please join us again for another discussion of photographs from our exhibition Touchstones of the 20th Century.